Okay, Pastor Matt here, and we are recording for the Mortification of Sin by John Owen, Chapter 7, Part 3. We've gone through the first couple sections, but now he's dealing with an objection. So we've done the first two parts of Chapter 7, but now he's dealing with an objection that he considers, hey, someone might have this objection. And here's the objection that he gives. What should non-believers do when they are convinced of the evil of sin? Should they not stop fighting against it? Should they live without moral constraints, give their lusts free rein, and join the ranks of the worst of men? This is a good way to put the whole world into chaos. It's almost prophetic, isn't it? It will return us to the dark ages, open the floodgates of lust, and spur men to rush into sin with delight like a horse into battle. So the basis of this question then, because he's been arguing in this chapter that the mortification of sin is the work of believers, true believers. And so someone may have this objection. Well, if that's only the work of true believers, then are you suggesting that just everybody else should just, whatever, right? And he has four answers to this objection. The first one is answer number one, right here. God forbid. It is a testament to the wisdom, goodness, and love of God that by numerous ways and means he restrains the sons of men. He keeps them from pursuing the excessive and riotous behavior that their depraved nature would violently lead them to. By whatever means he does this, it demonstrates the care, kindness, and goodness of God that keeps the whole earth from being a hell of sin and confusion. This is called common grace by theologians. Common grace is that grace that God gives to all people. There's specifically the grace that comes in that salvation that we talk about, and we think about grace that way. But there is a common grace that is given to all people. So when you have someone who does not love God or know God or do anything for him, he could do something kind to someone, even though in the scheme of things it's not sinless or righteous ultimately. There's a reality that someone may exhibit some kind act, and that is ultimately from God and through God and by God's grace to all people. We could, you need to know more about that. There's a lot of great information about how God's common grace may um, work, but there's also a lot of great biblical references for those things that can be verified. If you have questions about common grace, let me know. Answer number two. There is a unique convincing power in the word which God is often pleased to display. It wounds, amazes, and in some sort of way humbles sinners, even though they are never converted. The word is not to be preached with this in mind, but it will have this effect no less. Therefore, let the word be preached, and the sins of men be rebuked. Lust will be restrained, and sin will be opposed, although these are not the results we seek. So, the results that we seek would then be the salvation of the person. Remember, this is an answer to that objection. And the reality is that if we're preaching the word, there's a convincing element. I think a great actual example of this is the country that we call America. Whether you like it or not, or whether you believe so or not, America was based on and founded on Christian principles. And there's biblical elements that are woven through the fabric of our culture and our laws. And I mean, just evidence of that is in courthouses, many courthouses today, you'll find the Ten Commandments plastered on the wall somewhere. Um, there's a "In God We Trust" element. There was for ages someone put their right hand on the Bible when they swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I mean, there's a reality that these things are there, and there's a convincing element that's played into our society, our culture, um, of these truths. Okay, and that's what he's talking about here. There's a unique convincing power in the word, which God is often pleased to display. So as we preach and teach the word, ultimately our hope is that people will be saved. But regardless, this is going to happen, and that's, if you think about what he's saying, and that's okay. If that happens and people are restrained by the power of the word, even if it doesn't bring them to salvation, that can happen. We hope that it will lead to their salvation, but if it doesn't, we don't just avoid it, right? Answer number 3. Even though killing sin is the work of the Spirit, is the work of the Word and the Spirit, and even though it is good in itself, it is not available to those who still suffer from bitterness and who remain under the power of darkness. It will not lead to their salvation. So this is an interesting, different turn with his answers, um, and it's the suggestion that, okay, if we're killing sin in our life, but not as a believer, um, it's still the work of the Word and the Spirit. And even though it's good in itself, it's not available to those who suffer from bitterness or remain in the fire. So that's not really what's going on in someone who is not a believer, right? So whatever they're doing that looks that way, that's not really what it is, and it's not leading to their salvation. That is his third answer. The fourth answer um, is this: let men know it is their duty, but only in its proper place. I do not remove men from mortification unless I intend to convert them. Someone who stops a man from mending a hole in his wall. This is a great example, by the way. Someone who stops a man from mending a hole in his wall to put out a fire that is consuming his whole house is not the man's enemy. You poor fool. It is not a sore finger, but a raging fever that you need to worry about. You set yourself against a particular sin, but do not realize that you are nothing but sin. All right. His final note in chapter 7, there's a few paragraphs left, is aimed at preachers. So I'm going to read through this without a whole lot of commentary here. Let me add this for preachers of the word, or those who aspire to that profession by the good hand of God. It is their duty to plead with men about their sins and to weigh into particular sins, but always remember that it is to be done with the proper goal of both law and gospel. That is, in so doing, their intent must be to reveal the sinner's true condition. Otherwise, by accident, they may drive men into mere formality or hypocrisy. Little of the purpose of preaching the gospel will be served by that. It does not help to beat a man out of drunkenness, only to drive him into sober formality. A skillful preacher strikes at the root with his axe, and he strikes at the heart. It is a good work to angrily attack the particular sins of ignorant and unregenerate persons, which the world is full of. We can do that with great efficacy, vigor, and success. However, if that leads them to painstaking put away only the sins that were preached about, then we may have beaten the enemy in the field, but we have driven them into an impregnable stronghold beyond our reach. You do not gain anything by picking on a single sin. You have nothing to hold the sinner by. Instead, get to the point of his sinful condition. Drive the argument to its source, and then deal with him there. Breaking men of particular sins without breaking their hearts denies us the advantage in dealing with them. That's an important paragraph. I'd encourage you to rewind and listen to that again, because this is one of the issues that I think that we see in our world today when people are battling certain sins and not getting to the heart. And there's a lot of people on the conservative side of morality, politically speaking, that really their focus is just on certain sins. And the reality is that we need to go deeper than that. It doesn't let off the hook those sins, but it does drive past those sins. Those are just fruits of a sinful heart that needs to be dealt with. Here's where the Roman mortification is seriously in error. Speaking of the Roman Catholic Church, they drive all sorts of people to mortification without considering whether they have a principle for doing that or not. They are so intent on having men mortify their lusts that they call men to mortification instead of calling them to believing. The truth is, they do not know what it means to believe or what mortification is used for. Faith for them is just a general assent to the doctrine taught in their church. Mortification is when a man takes a vow to seek a certain course of life, to deny himself some of the things of this world at a cost. Such men do not know either the scriptures or the power of God. When they boast of their mortification, they are really celebrating their shame. Some ethicists among ourselves also overlook the necessity of regeneration. They direct people who complain of a sin or a lust to vow against it for a month or so. They have no clue as to the mystery of the gospel, which are much like Nicodemus when he first came to Christ. They ask men to abstain from their sin for a while. This usually makes their lust stronger. So true. Maybe with a struggle they keep their word, maybe not. This only increases their guilt and torment. Does this mortify their sin at all? Do they conquer it? Is their condition changed if they manage to relinquish the sin? Do they not still suffer from bitterness? Is this not tantamount to making brick without straw, or worse, without strength? What promise has been made to any unregenerate man to justify doing this work? What assistance can he expect for performing it? Can sin be killed without an interest in the death of Christ, or mortified without the Spirit? If such directions succeed in changing men's lives, which they seldom do, they never reach the point of changing their hearts or conditions. It may make them self-justified or hypocrites, but not Christians. It often grieves me to see people with a zeal for God and a desire for eternal happiness kept under a hard, burdensome external worship and service of God by such directions. They toil all their days with these deceptive efforts to mortify their sins, oblivious to the righteousness of Christ and unacquainted with his Spirit. I know too many of them. If God ever shines into their hearts, giving them the knowledge of his glory in the face of his Son, Jesus Christ, then they will see the folly of their present way of life. That ends chapter 7, and we will pick up chapter 8 in the next episode. Thank you for listening. Please consider subscribing if you have a way to do that, whichever service you're using for listening to this podcast, or if you're watching it on YouTube. And hopefully this is a benefit to you. If it is, I'd love to hear back from you. Please consider letting me know that. Again, thank you for listening.